Hi, it's Toraph Moses. It's Thursday, April 16th, 2020. So this video is going to be an expansion to my spiritual journey. The prior video was basically an overview on it. So this video is going to give a little bit more details on my spiritual background. So it all started when I was around a toddler, so around 3 or 2 years old. I remember recalling interacting and interfacing with elemental beings such as fairies. They would play with me in the rain. The Philippines, where I was born, had a lot of monsoon seasons, so I remember having a giant plant leaf as an umbrella, and the fairies would just come underneath the umbrella. I thought it was cool. My relatives thought I was crazy, but that is going to be an ongoing theme in terms of everyone thinking that I'm loony. So from being a toddler all the way up to the age of 5, I eventually had to move to the States, and I grew up in New York City. That's when the experiences with the elementals stopped. So I kind of stopped seeing fairies and imaginary friends because I was indoctrinated into the educational system here in the States. And those in the States, or those that live in Western countries, understand exactly what I'm talking about. You know, they program you and remap your mind to think more of a linear way and basically extract any type of spiritual connections, in other words. So from my adolescence into my maybe around 13-ish is when I started to become a very angry adolescent. So it was a hard time for me because from my childhood from 5 to 12, I was in a abusive household, you know, so it was very difficult for me to see the beauty in the world because I was traumatized by domestic violence in the home, which was, you know, impacted me in terms of trauma. So from then on, I became kind of like a dark spirit in a way where I retaliated. I was a rebel at 13, and I disliked life, and no one should have so much hatred and anger at that age, but I guess I was a product of my environment. I didn't understand the scope of my mindset at that time, which was very dark, and I didn't have good guidance because, you know, I viewed my family as the enemy, and it shouldn't be that way for any growing child. So from the age of 13 to, I would believe, high school, I was still lost, still sleeping, lost in that coma, and I'm sure everyone can concur to a coma where you're just living life very structured, very rigid, black and white. You know, it's continuing to have some anger issues as well. Throughout my childhood, I recall being in and out of counselors that would, you know, like psychologists, psychiatrists, social workers, in and out of my life. That's how troubled I was as a child, as a young adult as well. So it wasn't until I became an adult around like 19, 20, 20s that I started to blossom and become more happy, because the friends that I eventually end up hanging around with were very positive, and they taught me about life and reminded me of what life is all about in terms of family, community, and I found family through my friends. And it wasn't until then, when my nephew was born, around that time I was in my early 20s, that I was again reinforced with what life really means, with just love, family. So he was that icon of love for me, and I treated him like a son. It was a magical time for me in my early 20s. So fast forward into the year 2000, I was around 25 years old, just turned 25, and I had lost my mom, my stepfather, and my nephew due to a house fire. It was an accident back in the early 2000s, and it devastated my whole family. It devastated our life in terms of turning it upside down, and we were all displaced, my siblings and I was in an induced coma for about 2 months due to severe burns. I was 50% of my body was severely burned, and I was intubated, on life support, and many surgeries to get my body. And the physicians, I recall them mentioning that I was a miracle child, because I came out of it with, with healing, like my body just healed miraculously. That's what I'm trying to convey. So post fire, I was in a lot of, it took me a while to get over the grief. I was in mourning for about almost 10 years. I was trying to do some soul searching inside, but it didn't work. I reverted back to my rebellious phase, where I hated life, hated myself. Again, I sought out therapy, psychotherapy, which is to be expected, especially with someone coming from such a traumatic near-death experience. So fast forwarding from 2000 to 2010, at 2010 I mentioned that I was activated at that time. And what I mean by activated is that I started to get over the deaths, started to love myself in a way. I wasn't fully there, but at least it was acknowledging that I'm loving myself, taking care of myself. My friends were a foundation for me at that point in my life as well. So everything ended up working out. Of course, you can still stumble into life drama, and it happens. But so from 2010, I started to be a student and explored the unknown, or the ancient mysteries, the occult. I studied about UFOs. I studied about cryptoids. I studied on, secret agendas within secret agendas. So that took me from 2010 all the way up to 2012. So I was an avid student in the occult, the supernatural, for that time. I didn't have a lot of paranormal experiences from that time. It wasn't until I started to get more codices, downloads from the higher realms, and in 2012, that's when I became transformed in a way. I guess because of the Great Awakening, or the shift that happened in 2012, 2010, that was very powerful for me in 2012. So I received somewhat my powers back, my psychic abilities, ESP. So I perceived the world differently, because I started to get more astral travels into the higher realms, into different realities, into the lower realms as well. And one more thing that I didn't mention during my time in the hospital, I was in a coma, but that coma allowed me to transport my astral self into different realms, such as Agartha, also known as Inner Earth or Hollow Earth. So I was there to, I guess, be in a meditative state and to heal while my body was recovering physically in the top world. My spiritual aspect or higher self went into Agartha to heal. During my healing time in Agartha, I remember experiencing glimpses of my past lives, as well as my future self in on the earthly plane. And I remember encountering beings there, and I mentioned it in the previous post, Atlanteans, Lemurians. These were like a combination of feline people, insectoid, which are ancient ant people, and what else? Did I mention ant people? Yeah. Okay, so Lemurians, Atlanteans, insectoids, which are the ant people, and the cat people, the feline race. Just to list a few, there are other some Centaurian guards or Sentinel guards. That there were two of them. They were very tall, and these were guarding, I believe, like gates, stargates perhaps, or portals to different realities and dimensions. And I did encounter and interact with a guide. I believe he was part of my species, the Toraph, and I'll go into the Toraph later. Or it could have been just a guide from the Agarthan network. I can't remember in detail what. Eventually I will remember it all. So I definitely wanted to touch briefly on my experience in Agartha. And it's interesting because from 2000 to like 2018, 2017, 2018, 2019 is when I started experiencing a lot of deja vu. And that deja vu was experiences and memories from my time in Agartha, where I was shown glimpses of my past as well as future self in terms of experiences. So I'll briefly go into that when we get to that timeline. So during the 2017, 2018 is when I started to become transformative and shifting into different perceptions and consciousness. I was at that time following Simon Parks, the founder of Connection Consciousness, and I also was interested in Dolores Cannon, Project Camelot with Carrie Cassidy. Just to list a few, eventually around 2018, I stumbled upon the liftings. Christopher Stephen Jacobs, he's a medium and he does channelings and readings. And he, similar to Simon, however, he can actually interface with the ETs or IDs, which are interdimensional beings, through mediumship. So that was very interesting, and that opened up a lot of can of worms, and I wanted to study more on the different alien races based on his content. I decided around 2019, before I go into that, I just wanted to mention from 2015, 2016, 2017, I started getting more downloads through my astral travels of encounters as well with different alien races. One of those alien races back in 2018 was they're called the Mantrocons, I believe. This information was given to me during my read with Christopher Stephen Jacobs, and he mentioned that these beings are, their universe is no longer existing, but to describe them from my point of view, they look like a hybrid between an infant child face. Their bodies were gigantic, and it's like a giant manta ray. And so they had wings and a tail, a long tail, but the body from the head to the torso to the abdominal to the pelvis was more of a caterpillar. So just it's all meshed in, blended perfectly. So it looks like a hybrid between a human infant in terms of the head and face, and an insect caterpillar larvae, and a manta, like a sea manta. So that was very interesting. They're negative, but my energy tried to turn its negative matrix into a positive. So that was interesting that I encountered that. I also encountered a situation where I had a past life, and this was in 2019, summer 2019, where I was an elemental witch back in Russia. I believe it was in Kazakhstan, but it's part of the Tartaria Empire. She was a late 18th, 19th century witch, and then she was recruited by the Cabal at that time because of her ability to summon spirits. So she was part of a sexual ritual that included some of her friends, and they, I believe, accidentally summoned the demon known as Asmodeus. And I got a confirmation from Christopher Stephen Jacobs. I had a second session with him, and I'll go into detail on how that all developed with my sessions. So that was very interesting that she was able to commune with demons and spirits, and eventually she did separate from them, the Cabal, and she felt they couldn't control her, so she left, and that's how she was able to leave, because her vibration didn't allow any darkness to control her. So you have to be a willing participant in terms of being controlled or a slave. You can break out of your slavery bonds by your free will, your sheer will, and your intent. So that was very interesting to know that about. There's more details on that astral regression, or past life regression as I call it, but it's just so convoluted. I don't want to take too much time on it. So just to jump forward now to discovering Christopher. So it was until February 28, 19, I decided to leave a job that I had conflict of interest in, and that whole scenario prompted me to reach out for help, because my soul was dying. In other words, I was losing myself due to the stressors of life and the stressors of work. So I reached out for help, and hired Chris to do a reading of me, and I found out that I am from the Boots Hercules constellation. My species are called the Toraph, and there are 9-10-foot slender, gold and yellow, with long hair. They're akin to or related to, but not from the earth realm, the Sasquatch, the forest people, but they share lineage somehow, but they evolved in the Boots constellation, Hercules constellation. So that was very interesting to find out that. And I did mention in that prior video that they have a very unique way of reincarnating. So their go-to, or they choose to incarnate it as themselves. So I'm assuming, I didn't get a confirmation, they're a walk-in, so maybe once I was conceived or was born, that's when they would do a walk-in. I believe they would do a walk-in while I was gestating and growing in as a fetus. I believe that's the case. I'm not sure or how it's done, but it's very fascinating. Hopefully through these meditations I'll get more answers on that or on it, and so let's see what happens with that. So what else about the Toraph? So I was also told that I've been reincarnated many times, so maybe millions of times. So I, based on the information of the Toraph, Christopher also did some private channelings on his own, and then the Toraph, my father LaRoche, he channeled my father out there in the stars, and he gave a brief overview in his Patreon post on the Toraph and their connections with ancient past. So they were part of the Orion or Time Wars, those who follow that. They were also part of a time when the Boots and Hercules constellation or Federation of Worlds, they were also encountered the Draconian Dark Anunnaki Empire that tried to harvest that part of space, but the people or the Federation of Worlds out in the Boots, they united and they put a stop to that. They were invaded twice from that Patreon post, and but they managed to overthrow that takeover through their sheer will. Because you have to be a willing participant in order to be taken control of, and they weren't having it. They managed to psychically and willfully, as a one world, decided that they would not be invaded, they would not be taken over. And that is a message to us human beings in the now, that we don't need to tolerate any more of the BS. We don't want to be subjugated to any more limitations or slavery. It's done. That system is done, and we are definitely going to come out of it. So I had a second session with Christopher. That was December 2019. And before I go into that, the summer of 2019 was very interesting as well. After my initial reading with Christopher, I fell into a depression. Again, I'm in the last stages of transformation. So when you get to hear the truth about your exotic past, it kind of like changes your psyche, and it also changes you physically on a molecular quantum level. So I didn't take it very well, and I started to have running thoughts about all different things, and then my psychic abilities were also enhanced. So as we mentioned, it spiked from I think I mentioned in my last post that throughout my life I was able to interact and interface with spirits, ghosts, demons, but it really escalated in terms of spiking, and it was an off and on occurrence from 2010 to 2020. It's when it really started to get a little bit more experiences with the supernatural. So at this time in 2019, summer of 2019, I went on a road trip. I know I'm stumbling. it's hard to describe what I'm about to tell you. I went on a road trip to Mount Shasta in California. So I was in a very harsh time. I was unemployed from February all the way up to that time when I left to Mount Shasta. So I decided to just leave everything and just go to California and make a life out in California with no plans, not a lot of money, and I just went. I just took a chance and took a very risque trip, uh, but it kind of backfired, and I'll get into that. So during my time traveling there, I did more self-reflection, and although I was kind of lost because it wasn't the responsible decision to do without proper planning, because I didn't have any provisions, I didn't plan properly, you know, that I end up coming back. But during my encounter, while at Mount Shasta for a very short time, so I was there for basically overnight. I prior to getting off the station, I was psychically attacked by, for what Chris and I discussed post that trip, it was some dark Orions, and as well as this giant monster that I encountered and saw. So this being was a cross between a giant spider. Its essence was Alpha Draconis, and it exhibited lethal psychic powers as a Draconian, and it was just also kind of like an artificial intelligence. It was definitely laboratory made. From what Chris told me, it was planted there centuries ago, if not millennia ago. So possibly during the Orion Wars, it was placed in that region of Dunsmuir, California, which is very foresty. It's in the Mount Shasta region. So it encompassed the entire. Its mass covered the whole Dunsmuir, California, and not only that, it reached down from Northern California all the way down towards what's that space? Bohemian Grove. So it reached all the way down there. So past San Francisco, yeah, Sacramento, all of that range. So, and it basically was there to, it's like a centurion, I can't say the word, a guard. So it was guarding that area, or sentinel, yeah, it's a sentinel. And it basically gave me some visions of dying or committing suicide. So that was very interesting. And I've never physically encountered a creature such as that, especially because I think it was just so frightening because it was so big, and it just was just raw evil as well. And psychically, like it was messing with me. I felt like my being attacked by the Dark Orions and that creature. I felt like like you're folding over into like a fetal position, and you're shaking, you're convulsing, because the energies that's coming from those beings was overwhelming my mental capacity, my physical capacity. It was just crashing. My spiritual capacity was just crashing. So I managed to face that entity the next morning, and that's when I did a blessing, and I temporarily weakened that being, So it was very interesting how I managed to get out of that without getting hurt. And I also, prior to meeting that creature, I also encountered a yeti. From what I understand from Christopher, there are a lot of yetis at Mount Shasta, guarding Mount Shasta. They work for the Orions, the Dark Orions there. And there's a huge military base in Mount Shasta too, so I don't know the connection to that. I'm sure there's no connection to that, but definitely Mount Shasta is connected to Talos City, which is part of the Agartha network, the Inner Earth. So there's an underground city down there that's connected to Agartha. So yeah, that was just a very scary experience, a real life experience in the physical world that I've never encountered. I've encountered entities through astral traveling or vivid dreams, but some spirits and ghosts did manifest when I was in my adolescence, in my teenage years, in my 20s, 30s, but never to this capacity in terms of, like, in your face, otherworldly entity. So then I started to, around December, I decided to do another reading because I received some downloads of events very similar to what's happening in the current now with the COVID-19 pandemic and the impacts of that in our today now world. I didn't know what capacity of it, so I just gave questions that related to my past in terms of sharing information about my past life regression with Chris, and then we discovered what that was about. And you can also get this podcast, this reading session. I'll link the link to my reading sessions with the Liftings Christopher Stephen Jacobs, session 1 and session 2, as well as the podcast from his Patreon posts, and they will give details on the Toraph and more of my detailed background on my experiences throughout my life. So now that we're here now in 2020, it's I'm receiving more visual and audio downloads, and in my prior video I mentioned that during my astral travels, as well as I would receive waking premonition. So like right now I could get a download, which is a premonition of current or future or past events, and it's basically like a download of information from either from my higher self or from LaRoche, my father out there in the boots, or it could be from other galactics or interdimensional beings that are trying to give me a message. And these messages or these downloads, premonitions, are kind of cryptic, so they kind of like, they're images, but they could be scrambled. But some downloads can be so concise. It's like A, B, C, D, E, F, G, like a film. It could be like played as a film. And that's when I know that that's meant to come out. And when I get those types of downloads, I write it down and I send it out to friends to see if they can corroborate my message or that download. And I do get that confirmation. It's very scary to get certain confirmations, but Yeah. Because sometimes you want to be right, but then again, if you hear the truth, it hurts, right? So that's another thing why a lot of people nowadays are subjugated to just doing their own self-reflection, and when they hear the truth, they can't deal with it. So I had plenty of time from 2000 to 2020 to really go through a trickle effect, in terms of awakening. So, I would say that I'm in the transitioning into the ascension phase. I had to look at my pad because I didn't know the word. Yeah, so now from 2019 to 2020, it's this for those who had done the work for a time. We're definitely entering that shift from transitioning into the ascension phase. And I started to meditate. In the beginning, I started meditating around 2015. I took a course in college. I sucked at it. I didn't like meditating, but I wanted to learn it so to help me with my spiritual journey. And through that meditation, it really allowed me to at least get into a serene state. But I didn't start meditating until the lockdown, to be honest with you. I thought it would be a good idea to test it and see what happens. And then I wanted to like record my manifestations and the messages, because I thought that we're entering the fifth dimension. We're shifting into it, and we are able now to manifest through our thoughts at a quicker rate versus what we tried to manifest maybe a year ago or 2 years ago. It was this delay because we were on a linear timeline, although time no longer exists or relevant, but people still acknowledge time, which is probably why we're still in that 3D, 4D, transitioning into the fifth dimension, sixth dimension, or fifth dimension mindset. Excuse me. So yeah, I feel like I'm rambling. So yeah, that's what I wanted to expand on, and I feel like I'm leaving things out, but if I'm not, yeah. So the visions now are getting more in color, like as I mentioned before, the dreams were mostly black and white, or the astral experiences were mostly black and white, and then it gradually became white with sound, and then I was able to experience color, no sound, and then color with sound, and then color, sound, and I'm able to touch and feel things and hear things. So that was very, very interesting. And from 2012, I would say, to the now is when it's like all of the astral travels have been in color. All the dreams, the vivid dreams, the lucid dreams have been in color, and I could still hear and smell things, and I could recall it the next morning. I don't even have to write it. If it's important, it will stay with me for the day, and then I would have to write it. So some dreams or some astral travels, I'm an artist, so I'm a visual artist, so I can draw it on a pad of paper and then translate it onto the computer for more details. So that's very interesting as well. So yeah, so thank you for taking the time to hear me ramble. If you have any questions, please write a comment and subscribe. I am putting up a new YouTube channel called Toraph Moses. So my previous videos would be now uploaded into this channel, and I would also link on this video links to my previous reading sessions with Christopher, as well as give you any details on upcoming postings. All right, thank you. Bye.